welcome everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and share slides and just set a little bit of context for our conversation today. I am joined by friend and colleague J.R. Quo, who focuses on mental health in his work and has all sorts of really interesting things to talk to us about here today. I'm Jen Simpson. I'm the CEO at Integrated Work, and I wrote the book, The KOAN Method: Breakthrough Leadership for a Divided World, to foster conversations just like these, where we really dig into what are the things that keep us stuck in old models and old ways of doing things, and how do we really reimagine the systems that we operate inside so that we can bring more kindness, be more open, be more adaptive, and really harness the power of networks to move progressive change forward together. And so in Zen Buddhism, the idea of a koan is really a saying or a phrase that is designed to break your brain a little bit, to reveal the fact that we can't logic our way to enlightenment or to deeper understanding. And so I really love this idea of sitting in the question just a little bit longer, sitting in the uncertainty and creating space for breakthroughs, for new awareness, new insight to find us. And Cohen also stands for building these kind, open, adaptive networks that create alternative models for how we lead and live in the world that we're building. And so a KOAN conversation brings those principles to bear on issues we may have grappled with before. So today we're going to bring a little bit more empathy, a little bit more transparency, and really dig into how can we move things that might feel stuck, and really harness the power of network and community to come up with some innovative new solutions and examples. And so my colleague today is JR Quo, and I'm going to stop sharing JR and just invite you to say a few words of introduction before we dive in.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for opening up for us, Jan. So again, my name is J.R. Guo. I like to say that my life mission is to inspire people to make positive changes in their life through mental health and through DEI type of work. So I'm a professional speaker that specializes in mental health. So I started my own company back in 2017 that really want to humanize mental health. And I just feel very fortunate that throughout my last 15 years of speaking, I have different opportunities to work with many different large corporations, nonprofits, and a lot of different universities.
Excellent. And so tell us a little bit, when you think about this idea of mental health at work, why is that something that people should care about or pay attention to? And how have you woven that into the fabric of your work?
So great question. Thank you. So I will I will start off by sharing this story. So even though I've been speaking for 15 years, focusing on mental health, back in 2013, 14-ish, I had this amazing opportunity, professional opportunity that I couldn't say no to. So I got I got brought on to run a construction company. So when the owner, which is my friend's friend, he needed help. My friend's friend, he's so good at sales, at design, you name it, right? But he's not really good at administrative type of work. So, and then I'm pretty good because I have a lot of background in running nonprofits, running small businesses. I'm like, sure, I can, on the side do some quote unquote consulting work. So I started working, helping him out. And the funny story is that within a month, his company received three large multi-million dollar contracts.
Mm,
And the funny thing is that overnight, I became a CEO, right? Because I was the only one that had access to his books, right?
mhm.
I'm the one that only had direct access to the owner. So overnight, everyone started looking at me for answers, for next steps, for all these contracts. So when I started, we had about 8 employees. And when I decided to move on for the company, we had 48 employees. So so I helped to develop the whole sales team, HR, you name it, right? And Google, I like to joke around that Google was my best friend because I had no idea what the hell I was doing running a construction company. So
Today it would be Claude or Chat GPT, right?
exactly. I wish back in exactly. I wish back in 2013, 14, we had Chat GPT. Like it would, yeah, it would help make my life so much easier. But so of course, I was still doing mental health speaking here and there, but my primary focus was running this company, helping my friend to run this company. And of course, I tried to not implement, just be aware of mental health issues, especially in the construction world. But I still remember very clearly that the company's lawyer, our company's HR team or company that represent our HR or the HR company that represents us told me that don't go there. Don't talk about mental health. Right. And that's one piece of information. And another thing, what I'm seeing is that a lot of my workers, they were definitely going through some difficulties. Right. I'm not diagnosing them at all. But in construction world, it can be hard world, very
Hmm.
physical. Right. And for
Hmm.
example, one of my PMs, one of my project managers, I could tell that he was struggling. And if I had to give him a mental health challenge label, I would say he was definitely struggling with depression, pretty severe depression. Right. And I know that part of me, I know that he just needed a buddy, a friend to talk about, to validate his experience. Right. Of course, there's something other thing going on in his personal life. Right. He just needed that 15, 20 minutes of sit down, maybe over a coffee, over happy hour, just kind of talk it out. He just needed someone to validate, acknowledge his experiences, his mental experiences. Guess what? I couldn't do it because the lawyer, the HR people say that don't even go there. It could be a liability issue. And we're talking about 2014, 15, when mental stigma was still very heightened. And guess what? His performance, the PM project manager's performance decreased. And as any good manager, right, that I had to put him on what? Performance improvement plan, which we know that that's kind of like just straight up bullshit. Excuse my language. Just kind of useless, right? And I saw his gradual deterioration. And finally, we just had to let him go, right?
Hmm.
Don't get me wrong, he was a very good guy, a hard worker, a good person, very caring person, especially again in the construction world. And unfortunately, that mental health challenge overshadowed this whole thing. Therefore,
Hmm.
that's why it is so important that we talk about mental health in the workplace.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, really, what I hear you saying is that this is something that we can ignore and just allow the problem to sort of grow and grow and grow until it, consumes the individual or the situation, or we can find a way to engage with it more directly. Um,
Exactly.
JR, you obviously know that my Cohen work has been deeply influenced by mindfulness and presence practices. And one of the things that I really appreciate and find fascinating about your background is that you actually studied as a Zen monk for many years. And so I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how your early experience with Zen influences or informs your mental health work today.
So yeah, so thank you for that question. So yeah, so Zen or meditation practice or mindfulness practices, I think it's very essential. Well, actually, in fact, it's a big part of my my own personal daily practices. Also, when I quote unquote when I preach, when I talk,
Hmm.
especially about mental health, And even with the, I incorporate a lot of Zen and mindfulness, i.e., mindset, right? Nowadays, the word mindset is being used a lot. So there's a phrase in Zen Buddhism, and I'm going to say it in Chinese. It's called 专一其心. It means that how can we develop this awareness, this focus, this discipline that we can, our mind is as sharp as a good samurai sword and can cut through
Mm,
anything like butter.
mm,
All right. How can we have a habit? So this does not mean that we stop our thoughts, right? Another analogy is the monkey, the
mhm,
jumping monkey. That is the Buddha used that term long centuries ago. That our mind is like jumping monkeys, well, monkey jumping around. It's so scattered, especially nowadays, right? We
mhm.
have so many distractions,
Yeah.
i.e., our phones. And even when we are driving, there are advertisements, like billboards. At home, we have TVs, radio, music. And so the idea of the 专一其心, this focus, this awareness, is not about suppressing or block off all these thoughts. It's about how can we develop this awareness, this discipline, this habit that we can focus our mind
Mm,
while other sounds, all these distractions are still happening. At the same time, you still can keep focus and keep at it. I'll give one simple
mhm,
example: working out, exercise,
mhm,
right? One of the biggest industries that we have in the States is gyms, exercise, lose weights, weight loss, you name it, right?
mhm.
But how many people actually do show up to work out at a gym? And we all know the data, right? First 2 weeks of January, uh, gyms spiked. And by February, everything just dwindled down. So the reason I'm bringing this example is that how can, using again working out example, there were many days, many times that I have absolutely no desire to work out, and my brain would tell me, we have all these voices, distractions, say that I deserve a day off, right? Today the weather's not good, or tomorrow I have a big day, I have a long day tomorrow, blah blah, all these noises that
Mhm,
trying to tell me not to go to the gym. And 专一其心, well, mindfulness, well, Zen practices, is that I'm very fortunate that last 10, 15 years, I have built up this mindfulness, this focus, that no matter how loud these distractions in my head telling me that I deserve a day off, I don't go work out, right? Whatever
mhm,
trivial reason, but my
mhm,
focus, my habit are there. I
mhm,
still, when I come home, put on my shorts, my shoes, go to the gym. Despite that, my body, all these
mhm,
noises, all these distractions. And this is what we call mindfulness or Zen practices 101.
mhm. And so, what are some what are some habits of mind that folks can cultivate that help them cultivate that kind of, presence and focus in their day-to-day lives? And how does that help folks sort of stay rooted or grounded or help with some of the mental health challenges that you're identifying?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always say baby steps, one step at a time. And even before that, these little baby steps, I want to go back to why or purpose, right? Why do you want? Why do we want to do certain things? Why do we want to meditate? Why do we want to build this awareness? Why do we need to increase this focus? And oftentimes, it's because the pain that we have, right? So a lot of times, for example, using myself as an example, at very early on, I realized that, oh, by the way, when I was younger, throughout my college years and 20s and even early 30s, I struggled with very severe depression. And for very early on, I know that I need to get my body moving, whether it's going for walks, resistant training, whether just doing stretching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So going back to my why, because if I don't keep my body moving, I can easily slip back into that dark space of, i.e., depression. So that is my why. So I think first that we really need to know, why are we doing this? If I'm just doing this for the sake of getting six packs, losing weight, it will never ever work, because these are very, very superficial reasons,
Mm-hmm.
very, very superficial purposes. And we know that superficial purposes, they're not going anywhere. But the moment I realized that I need these body movements because it's for my survival, then the
Mm-hmm.
reason is really deep. It connects with my body, that the real emotional need.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I always recommend people, highly recommend people take some time to really reflect, why do you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whether it's going to gym, meditation, taking on that new job, taking on that new hobby, buying new that car. So, and once you know the why, your purpose, and the stronger, the more powerful the purpose that we have, the longer we can go. Think of this purpose and why as gasoline.
Yeah.
I think of this
Yeah.
gasoline. And once you know the why, then how comes a little bit more naturally. And of course, we need to have realistic expectation, right? Like, again, in our society, we have this almost like this like short-term gratification. We want to succeed right away. And this is very, very opposite of Buddhism, opposite of Zen Buddhism. Because Zen Buddhism, we're talking about long-term wise. It's a lifetime commitment, not three
Mm-hmm.
months commitment.
Yeah.
So, yes, a lot of people just want to lose 20 pounds in a month. Well, a lot of people want to be successful, want to be famous within a year. Will get that promotion, get paid six figure right away. You name it, right? Don't get me wrong. We deserve all that. If we work hard, if we be being smart, yes. But think a little bit more long term. Therefore, I
Mm-hmm.
always recommend baby steps so we don't burn out, right?
Yeah. I
So,
think the other thing I'm really appreciating in what you're saying, JR, is that purpose or intention is part of what helps us clear out the noise, right? That having
yes.
that clarity of focus, it's like the drishti, right? It's what we train our attention on as we're, focusing, and
Hmm.
allows us to say, pay attention to this, don't pay attention to those other things, right? And so
Yes.
I'm curious, certainly a lot of the work that we do with leaders in organization often has an element of vision or direction setting. And part of what I'm appreciating in what you're sharing is that actually has a calming effect on the team, right? That like the clearer we can be about where we're going and why it matters, and help the team see what part their role contributes to the whole, that actually has a calming or pacifying effect on the nervous system, right? Because I'm not trying to
Yes.
filter quite so many things. And so when you're working with organizations around mental health, how much of the work that you're doing is at that very individual, sort of intrapersonal level? And how much do you focus on the environment that the organization can create to really support, greater equanimity on the team?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think that is so important because when I work with organizations or companies, like what you just said, that normally there are two levels. Well, in a way, I would say three levels: the leadership examples, the leadership commitments to the overall organizational well-being. The second level is the system, the culture, right? I.e., HR. Like, like we do live in a quote unquote law and order society. So there's a lot of compliances. There's a lot, people are afraid getting sued, you name it, right? So I'm talking about that. The second level is more about that, the compliance, the laws. So of course, the first level is more leadership, the culture. And the third level is that very individual level. All right. So oftentimes for example, when companies ask me to provide DEI workshop, especially if they ask me to do like a series, like 3 to 5 sessions within 3 months or 5 months, I often ask the question is that how invested is your leadership? If your leadership, if your CEO just want to do this as an HR check off, right? Well, if your leadership doesn't really care and just letting the middle management people or people within the company that are passionate to do all the work, and I often would tell them that, sure, I will do these sessions. You know what? Might as well just give me the money. And I don't even need to do the session because you know why? We're not going to have make any lasting impact, right? Of course, I don't say that that straightforward, right?
Still, point taken.
Yeah. So having that leadership example is so important. Without that leadership investment, that passion to set the tone, to set the culture, we will be just spinning the wheel over and over again. So
Mhm.
and sometimes that the leadership team would hire me to kind of coach them to how can they become more aware when it comes to DEI or mental health, right? And then how when it comes to compliance, yes, I did some HR. I do not enjoy it. So normally I just tell them straight up, that's not me. I prefer them to hire, like outsource this out. Now come to the individual level. Right. Now come to the individual level. Again, earlier I used the phrase that one of my missions is to humanize mental health, to humanize DEI. So how can I really convey this message that individual employees' mental health, well-being is so
Mhm.
important? In fact, it's essential. How can I convince this to the leadership team?
Yeah.
Right. That is always the challenge because we know that, Jen, you run a company, you know that, right? The balance between employees' well-being versus the bottom line,
Yep.
right? And also there's that historical fear. It could be bias, it could be prejudice that when we take care too much employees' well-being, there's this fear that the employees might take advantage of us.
Mhm.
Right. That is a genuine fear and concern that leadership, people in management position, that's true. Yeah, they concern. Right. So how can we really address these old school mindset, old school beliefs? And also, they don't
Mhm.
get me wrong, they are bad apples in a company. And how can we address that? And what's that balance? Going back to Zen Buddhism. Well, Buddhism, how can we find that middle way, middle path?
Right.
Right? That's always very,
Mm.
very challenging. But I'm going to end this question with this saying is that I learned this saying a number of years ago. And it comes from substance usage, like harm reduction type of practice. Is that the saying is that when you empower people, they make the best decisions for themselves. You see,
Right.
not the old
Exactly.
saying would be they would make the right decision. Again, whose right decision? Right, right. Immediately we go to good or bad, right and
Mhm.
wrong. But people will make the best decision for themselves and maybe even and most likely for the company if they
Yeah.
feel empowered.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, when you think about these different levels, if we worry about employees, taking advantage of generous benefits, it's interesting that like we look at the individual level, right? It must be individuals who just aren't motivated or aren't responsible or aren't ethical instead of looking at those other two levels, right? Like, have we created the
Yeah.
culture that pulls? Have we created systems that empower? What have we done to craft an environment that pulls for the kinds of behaviors and employee engagement that we're looking for?
Exactly, exactly. And also, yeah, thank you. Yes, for that. And also going back to, I used to this phrase before, this old school belief or mindset, right? That I'm also a victim of. And the simplest example that we have seen is that overworking for the longest time is a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it is still a badge of honor. And don't get me wrong, even though I'm a victim of this, I'm still
You still
wearing
do
that.
it.
I'm still doing it, right? Because it's so hard, right? Of
Mhm.
course, younger generations, they have started setting more and more boundaries, which is good for them. Good
Yeah.
for them. We need more of them setting. And so, how can we convince these people, i.e., the people in the leadership position that's still holding on these old school beliefs? Don't even again. I'm not saying it's good or bad, right or wrong, right? I believe it can go back to that balance. When that deadline's coming up, I hope, I do wish that everyone can put together and work as much as possible and finish the deadline. But when it's kind of low time ish,
Hmm.
come on, like just please go home. Right.
Hmm.
Please go, please take that vacation. Right. So it's this very intrigue. Well, again, I use the word intrigue balance is because going back to the Zen practice, the mindfulness, is that how can we whenever, and this is what I've been doing. And one of my goals for this year is that whenever I notice myself working long hours and feeling prideful when I have worked long hours, even though tradition is a good thing, right? I will use my awareness to really question myself, to reflect, ask myself, do I really need to work that extra 5, 6 hours?
Right.
Or can I just cut that down and use 2 hours for my self-care, right? Just
Right.
by simply catching myself, building this awareness and
Hmm.
really challenge all these quote unquote IE bias, prejudice, or old school cultural programmings that we all inherited since we were young. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so you're talking about how do we get more leadership support for, to dismantle those old school beliefs, to create more receptivity to these conversations. And so the title of our event today, Mental Health at Work, was the title of Mental Health Awareness Day back in the spring. And certainly there is less stigma than there was a decade ago. There's growing awareness. And we also are living in a pretty dynamic socio-cultural time, right? Where, how receptive any neighborhood, any community is to different issues can vary pretty widely. And so I'm curious how that growing awareness is influencing your work and whether you're finding more receptivity and, how do these conversations play out when you're working with teams and organizations?
Yes. So this is a great question. So something that I have noticed, and let me give you one piece of data that I have gathered from one of my projects in Los Angeles County. So the data is that younger generation of people, i.e., when um, people in their college years or 20s, maybe even in their early 30s, they have scored higher knowledge about mental health. versus the generation like 35 and above.
Mhm.
Right. That's first piece of information. The second piece of information that I found really interesting is that even though with this younger generation, with so much mental health information out there from TikTok, whether it's legit or not, right? Whether it's like a good information or misinformation, that we can talk about that later on. But with this more knowledge, more information, does not translate into
Mhm.
better well-being, does not
Mhm.
translate into actions. So don't
Mhm.
get me wrong. I'm really happy that across the spectrum, mental health people are more and more aware of mental health stigma, right? But my biggest concern right now, and something I see in the workplace too, is that with this information, knowledge, what have people done with it? Again, going back to exercise, diet, our physical well-being. I bet you everyone that listens to this podcast knows that how we can get healthy. Eat more
Mhm.
broccoli, exercise, right? That's it. There's information, these pieces of information being plastered over and over again for decades.
Mhm.
Veggies, eat more fruits, less carbs, no sugar, exercise 30 minutes to 1 hour per day. We know this, right? But how many people are actually doing it? Same thing with mental health, knowledge and information. So again, don't give up. In the workplace, there's something I noticed that more and more people are aware that okay, we need to do something, right? Mental health, like, is very important. So not only for our employees, for everyone's well-being, but also for business bottom line, right? There's again more and more data has shown that when employees are happy with good, healthy mental health, productivity goes up, profit goes up, you name it, right? We know that. But exactly how many of them are really, really sold about this and really want to implement and do something about
Mhm.
health? So this is also something that I've been seeing a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, what I appreciate about what you're saying, and I actually just there was a headline for an article that I haven't read fully this morning, but that's really making this case that facts aren't enough to change minds,
Yeah.
right? And that many of the things that we do to try to convince people that their behavior should be different is not only ineffective, in some ways it's anti-effective, right? That it can
Hmm.
actually cause like entrenchment and reinforce
Yes.
old behaviors. And the gist of that is really that we've got mental maps, right? We've got mental models, we've got stories about how the world works and sort of what our place is inside of that. And so I think if I'm understanding your point correctly, part of creating that shift evolves, transforming those stories that we have, right?
Yes.
About what it means to be a healthy person or what it means to be a good worker, right? That, if we equate a good worker with a person who can power through and work 80 hours a week, that puts a whole swath of the population fundamentally at disadvantage, and then we design
Yes.
systems that are optimized for the few instead of optimized for the many, right? And so what are some of the moves that we can make to optimize our systems for greater mental well-being for everybody?
Yes. So you use one really powerful word just now. The word is transformation. How can we transform? And going back to the example that I gave earlier, that more knowledge, more facts is good, but oftentimes don't translate into actions. And on top of that, another thing that I've been seeing, another trend, is that oftentimes people with these additional information, well, partial information about mental health, they would quote unquote self-diagnosed. Well,
Hmm.
they will quote unquote self-affirm that I'm okay. Or along that line, denial that even
Hmm.
though I'm not doing too hot, but I'm okay, right? Is quote unquote you people that need mental health, right? Is the people across the hallway, right? Across the hallway, or is the sales team that they need some
Hmm.
mental health? It's the engineers that they need some like emotional intelligence skill. I'm good, right? Because
Hmm.
I live in my own little bubble.
Hmm.
And so the challenge is that how can we really quote unquote transform this mentality? How can we really, i.e., change? I know some people don't like the word change. People don't like change at all. But when I s- the but I love the word transform. And for us to transform, and again, going back to that whole mindfulness, is that awareness,
Hmm.
right? That awareness that like, okay, yeah, I'm doing not too hot, but at the same time, I'm doing okay. And the ability to recognize that we can have two or three, four different emotions going on at the same time, that is how it can be
Hmm.
very, very powerful. Right? Noticing
Yeah.
that, okay, I'm feeling, I'm feeling numb, I'm feeling
Hmm.
content, I'm feeling kind of alone, lonely.
Hmm.
And the ability to recognize this and quote unquote own it up, especially for
Hmm.
man too. I'm going to talk about for man. How can we quote unquote literally man up and own up our emotions?
Hmm.
Because without that recognition, that strength, that courage to identify that, okay, I'm feeling kind of vulnerable right now. But it's not, I'm feeling okay, good.
Hmm.
But it's not, I'm feeling a little angry. Without the courage, without the strength to identifying these emotions and own it up,
Hmm.
guess what? We will continue to be stuck in this denial phase that I'm good.
Yeah.
The problem's yours. Right. So my encouragement, especially when I work with men and mental health, is that just accept who we are, accept what's going on in our body, in our mind, right? Instead of feeling
Hmm.
ashamed, embarrassed.
Hmm.
If you really want to man up, this is what I call man up. If men can really recognize, own up their emotion, that is man up. Right? And only
Yeah.
when we can man, quote unquote, my definition of man up, then we can slowly transform. We can slowly change. Then we can start thinking differently. That okay,
Hmm.
I'm not feeling, I'm feeling very vulnerable now. Instead of hitting that bottle, what can I do a little bit differently?
Yeah. Well, what I really appreciate in this, again, I mean, it sort of goes back to how we pathologize the individual rather than looking at the ecosystem or the environment, right? That like
Yes.
having that courage to speak up, to man up, is partially a function of how speaking up is going to be received or rewarded
Yes.
or punished in the
Yes.
environment, right? And so
Yes.
part of what you've got me really curious about, JR, is how do we focus, less on special treatment or, special support for individual humans who are struggling on any given day, and more on how we create ecosystems or environments that are designed, that are optimized for people to thrive, right? You were talking earlier about having enough gasoline in your tank. And, if we think of our organizations are powered by people, right? Our organizations run on people. How are we optimizing our system so that those people are at their very best all the time, right? And that the full, mix of humans that make up our organization all have the opportunity to bring their fullest selves, their best selves forward.
So If I have a solution, an answer to your question, I would be a multi-billionaire now. That's a stupid joke. Meaning that I think your question, what you just say is so important. And I wish I was smart enough to come up with like an amazing product that can solve all this. Then I can like buy myself a big old island and live on that tropical island for the rest of my life. That's a stupid joke.
Looks like we've
I-
got a partnership deal in the works here, JR. We got to cook
yes.
that up together.
I think that is an amazing question and definitely is a very complex question. And I don't have, to tell the truth, I don't have straight answers. I have some
Hmm.
thoughts, some ideas, and and yeah, and some of them are based on science and data. Some of them are based on mental health. Some of them are just I just made it up as I go, right? So yeah, so one thing I want to say, I want to address that. You mentioned that phrase, that quote unquote special treatment.
Hmm.
Special treatment. Again, I think this is back to human nature, that
Hmm.
us versus them. Back to
Yeah.
human nature of survival, right? And I think until we can really address this mentality, this mindset, us versus them,
Yeah.
then it's really hard to create that culture. Let me give you a few examples. Smoking break. People smoke and people don't smoke. People don't smoke. Be like, what the hell? Why do those people smoke, which is really bad for your health? Get those extra minutes of break. All right.
Hmm.
One example. Another example is, why do I want my tax dollar money to pay for someone's healthcare?
Right.
I'm healthy. Right. So I think historically, I'm not even, I'm just talking about again back to this human nature. So us versus them. And this is going back to using, and then, well, before I mentioned, I talk about that. And in the workplace, we see that. And the classic example, the sales team, and the engineers. There's always that conflict.
Hmm.
There's always that conflict. It's us versus them. Right. Of course, the leadership matters because the leadership, if a good leader can pull both teams together and work as a cohort.
Hmm.
So again, the reason I keep going back to this human nature is that until we have honest conversation about this human greed, human
Hmm.
desire, human anger, i.e., human emotions, right? I.e., our
Hmm.
existence, until we can have these honest conversations, then it's really hard to talk about that culture. And then, so again, me going back to that humanized mental health,
Hmm.
humanized. Let me give one example. Another example is due to professionalism. If men in the workplace start to get angry and yelling, how do other people perceive that man? Bad.
Hmm.
Lawsuit. Very bad. But let's break that down a little bit. If this man just want to express himself with absolutely no intention of hurting someone, right?
Hmm.
Then the conversation might be a little bit different.
Hmm.
But now, well, again, how can we define that hurting someone? Is this man hurting someone emotionally, psychologically, and physically?
Hmm. Right.
Right.
Or
So
how are they affecting the environment? Exactly.
exactly. Right. So, but that being said, having anger, having outbursts is part of human nature. So how can we create an environment that when men need to have that outlet, We can do it, support them a little more compassionately, and man can do it more consciously. Right. Again,
Mm.
I am not. I have to phrase myself really, really careful. I'm not advocating emotional, physically, or psychological
Mm.
abuse from men. No, no. But that's a real concern because, especially men, when growing up, we were told to suppress our emotion, to man up, to not talk about our angers, our feelings, right? But sooner or later, these feelings are going to pop up.
Uh-huh.
So going back to mental health, it's how can we raise younger men learning how to express themselves better? And as a
Yeah.
society, how can we support men that? And vice versa, right? When women in the workplace become more assertive, guess what? The
Mhm.
company, people will label them as bitch, right? And due to sexism, you name it, we label them as isms, right? Sexism, like
Mm.
but deep inside is that we don't know how man, again, going back to men, don't know how to handle a successful, powerful woman, assertive woman.
Mhm.
And maybe, yeah,
Well,
go ahead. Yeah.
I think part of what I'm hearing you say is that fundamentally we don't do a good job of fostering emotional literacy, in
Yes.
general, right? And certainly the ways in which that communicates can be gendered or can, fall out around different identity lines. But what I really hear you saying is we need environments where we've got more space for a broader range of emotions, where we've got better language to talk about those things so that they're not being suppressed until they blow up.
Yes.
And that we're creating environments where we've got space to sort of process and move on, right? That like the
Yes.
challenge is when things get stuck, right? When I feel like I don't have anywhere to move, that's when stress mounts and mounts and mounts, right? And Trent's
Exactly.
got a great comment in the chat here about this idea that again, mental health is highly individual, and you know it's a problem when I have a panic attack or when I can't get out of bed in the morning or when I'm flying off the handle in the lunchroom. But you know when it's a few steps shy of that and I'm just really stressed out or really irritable or feeling sad today, there's not as much space to attend to those things early enough that we can interrupt the cycle, right? Trent, is there anything else that you'd add to that?
Well, I mean, my question is for for JR and for everybody. Like, what are the things that you do that we can do to interrupt that cycle? What are the ways that we create an environment where it becomes easier to deal with the not quite panic attack, but close to it, not quite depression, but close to it, not quite explosion of anger, but on the path to those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Great question. Great question. So I agree with you. Nowadays, again, with this more information, a lot of words are being misused. Right. Like a lot of words are being misused. Let me give an example. So going back to the example, anxiety. It's common, normal for us to feel stressed and anxious. However, when people start feeling stressed and anxious, immediately they think that they have anxiety disorder. And technically, here's the more technical definition. To be in a quote unquote official anxiety disorder, you people have to experience this for 2 weeks or more.
Mhm.
And it had to severely interfere your life, your relationship with your friends, with your partners, interferes with your work, with your hobbies. So,
Mhm.
so that is definition. So when I have, for example, this week, it has not been a good week. My stress level is high. I feeling very anxious and worried. Do I have anxiety disorder? Probably not.
Mhm.
But 2 weeks later, if I'm still feeling like this, then yes. Then now we talk about a little bit more clinical. Then I will probably would need some sort of professional help, i.e., therapy, or a little bit more extra self-care treatment, right?
Mm,
So going back to Trent's question is that there's that vague area that like I'm anxious, I'm stressed, but I'm not quite there yet. But definitely I'm not. I'm not. I'm pretty far away from my baseline.
mhm,
So, and when this happens, whether it's in the workplace or in our life, I always recommend self-help, self-care.
mm,
I know the word self-help been used over and over again. So going back to the easiest way for me to explain self-help and self-care is that going back to our hobbies, going
mhm.
back to our hobbies, remember to do these little things that you love to do in your life. So if for example, a person's hobby is cycling, no matter how stressed, how busy your day, that person's day could be, just hop on that bike, even just for 10, 15 minutes, right? Can
Mhm.
help lower that stress, that anxiety.
Yeah,
And so that physical movement helps to regulate emotional feelings and which can impact our thoughts,
yeah.
right?
I think that regulation piece is so important. And what I really hear you saying is there's this sort of continuum of human emotion that we all experience, right? We all
Mm-hmm.
have days where we feel down, we all have days where we feel stressed. There are this broad spectrum of experiencing the world that any one of us might experience on any given
Mm-hmm.
day, and that the challenge comes when we stay in that state of either heightened or depressed, arousal effectively for too long, right? And then you end up with this sort of biological loop, right? Like my
Yes.
system's been flooded with cortisol for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. Now I can't snap out of it. Or I've been in this place of feeling alone and unsupported over and over again, and now I'm starting to feel hopeless and I don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
dig myself out. And so
Yes.
I think what I'm hearing is really important is both for organizations and individuals to identify those things that interrupt the cycle, right?
Yes.
That like allow for discharge, that allow us
Yes.
to find that set point, right? To come back
Yes.
to our healthy baseline so that we can move forward from there. I know we're almost at time, but you've used theater a fair amount in your work as one strategy to help folks sort of access what this might be like in a more embodied way. And I wonder if you could close us out today by just talking a little bit about how some of those more interactive or somatic kinds of practices can be a helpful tool.
So yeah, so thank you for the question. So yeah, so the project that I just concluded is one of my projects based in Los Angeles County is called Storytelling Theater. It's literally using live theater performance to talk about mental health. And by the way, this my whole concept, this whole project was inspired by Trent Norman, which is he's here to like the whole interactive theater project. So just imagine just imagine, and the example I love to give is that all of us here have attended at least, my assumption is that one mental health workshop or one professional training workshop. But just imagine storytelling theater is a mental health workshop with no PowerPoint. No PowerPoint. That's one. Second, that we know the power of stories. When you hear an inspiring story, we get so moved. But just imagine if you can see the story in front of you. And this is storytelling theater project is that we show especially and this project was for specifically designed for Asians and Asian American communities and folks that historically we don't talk about mental health. We do not talk a lot about stuff. And the play that we have is titled as Red Door. The reason it's
Mm,
called Red Door is because the color red is very, very auspicious in our cultures. But behind this red door, i.e., behind every family, there's an untold story. Well, they are untold stories, i.e., mental health traumas, challenges. And because of there are so many of these untold stories behind these beautiful doors, that there's so many of us are suffering or have suffered in silence and alone. So the play Red Door is about intergenerational conflict, about generational conflict and intergenerational cultural conflict between the Asian traditional cultures and beliefs versus American cultures and beliefs. And all these create a lot of conflict, which can cause a lot of mental health challenges, depression, suicide, substance usage, anxiety, abuse. So the power theaters are when they see a story that many of these Asian American folks can relate to, they feel like they can start talking. They feel like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not hurting or suffering alone anymore. And at the same time, if there's other folks in the room, because I have different interactive exercises that people start talking about their experience of intergenerational conflict and mental health, boom. Right. So the goal is that a 2-hour workshop of storytelling theater and Red Doors, it's not going to solve everything. But I hope that folks in the room we can
Mhm.
inspire them enough that they will continue to think about what they experienced and what they witnessed. So the more they can think about it, the more they can talk about it with their friends and family. In fact, the data from the surveys from these 14 performances that we gave, 86% of attendees expressed that after they watch the performance, the workshop, they feel more inspired to talk about mental health and to combat mental health stigma. Boom. That is my,
Amazing.
yes. So, yeah.
That is your mission right there.
Yes.
That's your offer nugget, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Well, thank you so much, JR. I'm sorry this time went by so quickly. I have questions we didn't even get to, and I've so enjoyed our conversation today. So, thanks to everyone who could make it live. This recording will go out in the next couple of days. And I wish you a really lovely journey as you head off on your travels over these next few weeks.
Yes. Again, thank you so much, Jan, for this invitation, for this amazing opportunity to talk with you all. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care. Have a great day. Bye bye.